Okay, everyone. I want to talk right now about a very condensed job flow timeline. So, what I did is I tried to just give you guys a sense of from start to finish how we find a job and how we move through the process of filling that position all the way to the point where we bill the client for the work that has been done. So let's start right at the beginning. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find a job to fill. So what we do is we go out and we find those warm and cold leads. We populate the database. We spend time looking on jobs boards like Indeed, like Simply Hired, Monster, Career Builder, plus those local sites. And what we do is we then get the information from those warm and cold leads. And again, those are warm leads, but the cold leads would just be going on to Google and looking for, internal medicine in Albany, New York, or whatever it might be. The specialty and then the city. So that's the cold lead versus the warm lead. We call into those offices and we do the cold call. We acquire a job. So we explain the benefits of what it is that we do. We tell them everything that they need to know in order to feel comfortable. And again, this may take a lot of time, but this is a numbers game. And then what we do is we have the prospective client sign an agreement. So it is important to remember that prior to going out to look for an actual candidate for a client, for a position, we need to make sure that we have an agreement in place. And everyone will have that diagnostics agreement where you'll be able to present that. It is not scary. It is very, very straightforward, very simple, and present that to the client, the prospective client at that point. And what they can do is either fax that back, because they're the only ones that sign it. They can fax that back to you, or they can, just copy it or scan it and email it back, which is always very better to do as far as I'm concerned, because the fax is just a nightmare. So if they can do that on your behalf, that would be great. Then what we have to do is we need to then discuss the position with the client. So that means we need to find out everything that we're going to pass along to potential candidates. What are the hours of the position? What days will they have to work? What specialty? What are the roles and responsibilities? Will the candidate provider work with other providers, other mid-level providers? Will they have to take a call? What are the HR benefits to this position? Will they get medical benefits? Will they get dental and vision? Will they get 401k or any other type of retirement? What type of PTO, paid time off, will they get? So, everything from will they get malpractice paid for? All of these things we will have to find out ahead of time, and I've discussed this in a previous tutorial or a different tutorial. The reason why is that we want to minimize that back and forth, that ping-ponging back and forth from the candidate to the client. Oh, client, I was just talking to a candidate and they had a question for you about such and such. Well, no, if we get all of that out in the open ahead of time, we tell that client we need to spend just 5 or 10 minutes with them asking them questions, then we can get all of that information, ascertain everything we need to know, and that we can repeat this process without having to go back to the client with a candidate, potential candidate, every single time, and know that we have a complete set of information to provide to the candidate, and we really truly can represent the position on behalf of the client. Then once we have all of that information, we need to write the job posting. You take that information, you plop it into the format that I've developed. We make sure that we have all of the keywords in there. For instance, if it's a dermatology position, we need to make sure that the word dermatology is in that job description at least 3 or 4 times, no more, no less. Nurse practitioner or physician assistant. We need to make sure that those words are in the job posting the required number of times, and so on and so forth. Then what you'll do is you'll take that posting, you'll send it to me. I will post it online, And then what you will do is you will field candidate responses and qualify these individuals. You'll look at their resumes, because 9 out of 10 times you will get a resume when you get a response. 10% of the time or thereabouts you will not get a resume, and in that case what you do is you email. You will have the contact information because again they've reached out to you either by phone or by email, and you will ask that potential prospective candidate for their resume prior to discussing the position with them. There's a couple reasons for that. The most insidious is that this potentially could be another recruiter that is potentially fishing for jobs, and we don't want to tell them where this position is so that they can just call up. We want to make sure that this is an actual candidate that is actually interested in the position. So we need to have proof of that, and that's why we require, one reason why we require the resume. The second is because we can, as I mentioned before, we can get into this conversation where we're asking all of these questions to the candidate, and it makes it just a heck of a lot easier to have something in front of you to look and then just glance over it while you're talking to them or prior to talking to them and ask them questions based on your knowledge of where they've been, what they're doing, where they live, and so on and so forth. Once we have that information, or let me even say this, is that once we have spoken to the candidate, we will also at that time ask them what their availability is. That is something that is another step saver, that we don't have to then go back to the candidate after talking to the client and say, oh, okay, they want to meet with you. What's your availability? If you're on the phone with a client and if you're on the phone with a candidate, conversely, ask them as much information as you possibly can so that you don't have to keep going back and forth. So when we're talking to that candidate in the qualification part of this, we want to be able to ask them what their availability is. It's sort of a last step after you talk to them about the position, ask them, where they've been, what they're up to, what they're looking for, so on and so forth. And then again, once we have all of that information, we take it back to the client. Now imagine this, you're the client, okay, and you've hired someone from Diagnostics to find you a candidate. And in comes this email along with a resume that says, dear client, or whatever, whoever the client is, I just spoke with so-and-so and am attaching their resume. They are interested in the position for internal medicine with your practice. And then you start to go and explain all of the things, basically a synopsis of your conversation with that candidate. So what you did is essentially just save them a lot of time and a lot of steps. You basically packaged everything and you shipped it right to them. So what they get is a resume and they get a synopsis of the conversation that you had. You did the work for them. That's what we're getting paid for. A conversation with a candidate can take 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, it depends. It depends on how it's going and how much there is to talk about. You may even develop a rapport with them and get to like them. All of that, even that personal information, can be shared in this email to the client. So again, the email may say something to the effect of, I am passing along the resume of so-and-so who is very interested in this position with your practice. As you'll see from her resume, she has 2 years of experience in this or that. She currently lives here. We were speaking and she told me that she has 2 kids. A little touch on some personal information so that they get a sense that, the client gets a sense that you did some work, that you actually spent some time talking to this person. They are looking to leave the practice in this, in 3 weeks or whatever, or they will need to give this much notification to their current practice prior to starting with you. They're requesting a $90,000 salary, if that's something they would consider, but they would like to first meet with you to discuss the position. It's, all of these things, you're adding value, you're sending all of this information to the client, and they will be very much appreciative of that. Then what we do is if the client agrees and they would like to schedule an interview, we can assist and facilitate in scheduling that interview. So a client may say to me, John, I'm available on this or this date between this time and this time. Can you just find out if so-and-so is, that would work for them? You go back to the candidate, put that into an email. A lot of times I'll just copy and paste it and dress it up, make sure it looks good, send it over to the candidate and wait for their reply. And then what I'll do is in some cases, I will provide the candidate with the practice website, the names of the individuals and contact information that they'll be speaking with, so that there is no question in anybody's mind, when this interview will take place, what day, where. So it's like that journalism: who, what, when, why, and where this is going to take place, who it's going to take place with, why. It's pretty much understood, but you don't want to leave any doubt in anybody's mind as to where they're going, what time it is, what day it is, who they'll be meeting with, all of that jazz, because that will make them confident. And then the other thing that I like to do at this point in this job flow is I like to explain to the candidate as much about the practice as I know. And I'd like to explain to the client as much about the candidate as I know. And the reason why is because in doing that, when they finally meet, they will spend much less time on the minutia of the position and really focus more on the individual personalities. It's like if you were to go and buy a house and you showed up to the house and you knew nothing about it. You didn't know the square footage, you didn't know how many rooms there were, you didn't know, what colors there were, you never saw anything about it online or ever heard, and you just showed up. You would be sort of blindsided, you would be overwhelmed with everything. And that would prevent you from maybe asking some good questions and focusing on some other things like personality, those secondary things that will lead to, that are very important, that will lead to a long-term relationship, and in this case, a long-term employment. And that's why I like to provide as much information to both sides as possible so that when they meet, they can focus on personalities. Now, a lot of times when it comes to the interviewing process, there is always one face-to-face interview. There are extenuating circumstances where someone may live very far away and they're coming to live there or whatever. Well, yeah, that's something that you can sort of address. Either you want to initiate a Skype chat or some other type of FaceTime or whatever technology is available that you can get these individuals to meet face-to-face, but just not in person, but they should at least have some type of face-to-face meeting. If the candidate is within close proximity to the practice, they should always and will always go to the practice, to the client. That there's no getting around that, and that's very well understood, and both sides will want that to happen. Generally speaking, the second interview, if and when there is, and about 80% of the time to 90% of the time there is a second interview, that will involve what's called a shadow day, or it's very similar to like a preceptor, where the prospective candidate will spend time following around the client, seeing patients with the client, spending time at the client's practice. And that will give the candidate a very good sense of what a day in the life is like, because at the end of the day, that is what they need to know in order to make a decision. And the client, conversely, wants to see that candidate in action. They want to ask good questions. They want them to engage in all of these things. And that's something that you're not going to necessarily have to explain to a candidate to do. It's almost like innate. They will go there. They know to ask the questions. They know what to do. They'll be very competent, so you don't have to worry too much about the candidate messing things up once they get there. Most times they should do a good job of doing that. After that process is over and the candidate has either gone the first time or the second time, you want to make sure that they collect information, they collect contact information from the client, and that they send the client a thank you email, a thank you note. At this point, the client may say, you know what, we love that person, we want to hire them. So then you get into the potential negotiations, the salary, all of that. Sometimes the client may say, you know what, we want to meet a couple other candidates. And so that presents a little bit of a problem, or can present a little bit of a problem, especially when you don't have like 2 or 3 candidates to send right away. Because if you have, the best optimal situation is if you have a job and what you do is you put that job posting out there and in comes 3 or 4 really qualified candidates. You talk to these candidates, you schedule them all at the same time or around the same time within 1 week or so, which is ideal. Again, this is the most ideal situation possible. And then the client has that opportunity to see 4 individuals all within of close, proximity of each other. And it doesn't drag on. You're not, that first candidate that interviewed isn't waiting another 3 weeks for you to find a couple other candidates to present to them. Not that you're going to tell the candidate that went that you're waiting for another couple candidates to come through. But that is the least optimal situation, is when you have a candidate that you send and then the client says, you know what, we really like them, but we just want to see 2 or 3 other people. Well, now you have to go and get 2 or 3 other people, and that might take some time. And while that's happening, that initial candidate, that first candidate, is sort of on hold, and there's always the potential that they could go find another job in the meantime. So there are some instances where you may explain to the client, look, I know that you want to see a couple other people, but I just want to let you know that it's my responsibility to tell you that this individual, the one that you really like, that you met with first, is going to, other interviews, and there's the potential that, he or she may have an offer. So that is one thing to contend with post-interviews. So now let's say that the client has decided that they would like to hire one of your candidates. That's great. What you will do is you will let the candidate know that an offer will be coming. A lot of times, this is just the way it happens. The client will make the offer directly to the candidate, and that's fine. I don't like to make written offers to candidates. What I like to do at the very most is say, hey candidate, just want to let you know that so-and-so will be calling you, the client will be calling you tomorrow to let you know that they're offering you the position. And the best situation would be for the client and the candidate to hash out the negotiating, the salary, the compensation package, and all of that, to hash all of that out on their own. In some cases, the client may say, and again, we're after the interview here. This is all after the interview once the client has decided that they want to hire. The client may say, hey, do me a favor, go ask the candidate what their salary range would be. So then you have to go back and ask the candidate, what's your salary range? And I did that today, as a matter of fact. You go back to the client and you say, here it is, and there becomes a lot of back and forth. If we can just get the candidate and the client to talk and make that touch base on this and hash it out themselves, that is the most optimal situation. The reason why I like to stay out of this, and the justification that I give to a client, is that, look, client, I would, normally I would make the offer on your behalf. However, I know that the candidate is going to have a lot of questions for you regarding things other than just the salary, starting date, other types of compensation, CME, PTO, all of that stuff. And I know that they would want to talk to you about that directly. So that is the best situation, because you really will find yourself in a ping-ponging situation, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, negotiating on all of these different things. It is so advantageous and so much in your best interest to, at this point, when the client wants to make that written offer or that verbal offer with the actual salary and dollar amount, that they make it directly to the client, to the candidate, either by email or by phone. Doesn't matter. Then what we do is we find out from the client. Let's say that the candidate accepts, and the candidate says to you, yep, this is great, I'm going to accept, awesome. You find out from the client, what you'll do is you'll find out when that start date for the candidate is. So then, this is the final step, and this is to bill the client. What we do is we find out, okay, well, this candidate is going to start with the client on March 1st. What we do is we send the bill directly to the client, and that bill will be for the full amount, for the full $6,000 or $7,000, whatever it might be. We send that to the client, and we expect payment within 30 days of that candidate's start date. And that is pretty much it. So that is the job flow from start to finish, from first finding those jobs all the way until presenting the candidate and billing that client for the work that was done. So I hope that this helps provide some type of understanding as to how this all flows.